What if your thoughts were the most powerful force in the universe? This audiobook unveils how your mind isn't just a tool. It's the architect of your reality. From ancient wisdom to modern science, discover the truth. Master your thoughts, and you master your life. Introduction. Welcome. If you're listening to this right now, it's not by accident. Something in you, maybe a whisper, maybe a scream, knows that your life is ready to shift. That the way you've been thinking, feeling, reacting, and existing isn't the end of your story. You might not know exactly how, but you sense it. There's more to you, more to your potential, more to life. And let me tell you this, you're right. You are far more powerful than you've been led to believe. The thoughts you think are not mere echoes in your mind. They are blueprints for your future. The way you speak to yourself, the way you see the world, the way you respond to stress, challenge, and possibility, these are not trivial patterns. These are forces, real and measurable, shaping every corner of your reality. So I want to welcome you to something different, something deep, something that will not just inform you, but transform you. You're not about to listen to another self-help book that gives you 5 generic tips for a better morning routine. This audiobook is not a surface-level patch. It's a total excavation. We're going to peel back layers of programming, decode the hidden patterns running your life, and guide you into full-spectrum awareness of how your mind operates. This is about awakening, not in a vague or abstract way, but in a direct, tangible, you feel it in your bones kind of way. What you are about to hear is the result of a lifelong obsession to understand the connection between thought and reality, between inner world and outer results. This book is a bridge from unconscious reaction to conscious creation. And once you cross it, there's no going back. Because once you truly see how powerful your mind is, once you feel what happens when you stop being a passenger and start becoming the architect of your life, everything changes. And that's not an exaggeration. That's a promise. Now let me share something personal with you, because this book wasn't written from an ivory tower. It was born from struggle, from years of feeling like I was living someone else's life. I had the degrees, the job, the routines, but deep inside, I felt misaligned, like I was stuck in a script I hadn't written. I was successful on the outside, yet silently unraveling on the inside. I tried to think positive. I read all the books, but nothing clicked until I stopped looking for external fixes and started asking the real question: who is doing the thinking? That question cracked everything open. I realized I had been living in a mental prison built not of steel bars, but of unconscious thoughts, patterns, assumptions, beliefs I had never questioned. And when I began dismantling those invisible structures, a new self emerged, not a fake, polished version, but my real self, powerful, peaceful, and awake. That journey led me here, to this book, and now to you. So let me be clear, this audiobook is not theory. It's lived truth. It's the distillation of years of inner work, spiritual seeking, scientific research, and deep reflection. It's packed with insights, stories, tools, and transformative practices that have changed not only my life, but the lives of countless others who've walked this path. And now it's your turn. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have it all figured out. All you need is a willingness to listen deeply, question courageously, and apply what resonates. The rest will unfold, I promise, because the real magic doesn't happen in what you learn. It happens in who you become as you live it. That's the work we're about to do together. At the heart of this audiobook is a single, seismic idea. Your thoughts shape your reality, not metaphorically, literally. What you focus on expands. What you believe becomes the lens through which you interpret life. What you assume becomes the code that your subconscious runs on autopilot. And here's the key. Most of your thoughts are not actually yours. They are inherited, recycled, installed by culture, trauma, family, media, and repetition. The vast majority of your inner dialogue was written by someone else. But once you realize this, you are no longer a victim of the mind. You become its master. And once you master your thoughts, you master your emotions, your habits, your relationships, your future, your life. That's not hype. That's neuroscience, psychology, and ancient wisdom converging into one undeniable truth. Everything starts in the mind. Everything. We live in a world that tells us to change our jobs, our bodies, our partners, our cities. What if your thoughts were the most powerful force in the universe? This audiobook unveils how your mind isn't just a tool. It's the architect of your reality. From ancient wisdom to modern science, discover the truth. Master your thoughts, and you master your life. Introduction. Welcome. If you're listening to this right now, it's not by accident. Something in you, maybe a whisper, maybe a scream, knows that your life is ready to shift. That the way you've been thinking, feeling, reacting, and existing isn't the end of your story. You might not know exactly how, but you sense it. There's more to you, more to your potential, more to life. And let me tell you this, you're right. You are far more powerful than you've been led to believe. The thoughts you think are not mere echoes in your mind. They are blueprints for your future. The way you speak to yourself, the way you see the world, the way you respond to stress, challenge, and possibility. These are not trivial patterns. These are forces, real and measurable, shaping every corner of your reality. So I want to welcome you to something different, something deep, something that will not just inform you, but transform you. You're not about to listen to another self-help book that gives you 5 generic tips for a better morning routine. This audiobook is not a surface-level patch. It's a total excavation. We're going to peel back layers of programming, decode the hidden patterns running your life, and guide you into full-spectrum awareness of how your mind operates. This is about awakening, not in a vague or abstract way, but in a direct, tangible, you feel it in your bones kind of way. What you are about to hear is the result of a lifelong obsession to understand the connection between thought and reality, between inner world and outer results. This book is a bridge from unconscious reaction to conscious creation. And once you cross it, there's no going back. Because once you truly see how powerful your mind is, once you feel what happens when you stop being a passenger and start becoming the architect of your life, everything changes. And that's not an exaggeration. That's a promise. Now let me share something personal with you, because this book wasn't written from an ivory tower. It was born from struggle, from years of feeling like I was living someone else's life. I had the degrees, the job, the routines. But deep inside, I felt misaligned, like I was stuck in a script I hadn't written. I was successful on the outside, yet silently unraveling on the inside. I tried to think positive. I read all the books, but nothing clicked until I stopped looking for external fixes and started asking the real question. Who is doing the thinking? That question cracked everything open. I realized I had been living in a mental prison built not of steel bars, but of unconscious thoughts, patterns, assumptions, beliefs I had never questioned. And when I began dismantling those invisible structures, a new self emerged, not a fake, polished version, but my real self, powerful, peaceful, and awake. That journey led me here, to this book, and now to you. So let me be clear, this audiobook is not theory. It's lived truth. It's the distillation of years of inner work, spiritual seeking, scientific research, and deep reflection. It's packed with insights, stories, Tools and transformative practices that have changed not only my life, but the lives of countless others who've walked this path. And now it's your turn. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have it all figured out. All you need is a willingness to listen deeply, question courageously, and apply what resonates. The rest will unfold, I promise, because the real magic doesn't happen in what you learn. It happens in who you become as you live it. That's the work we're about to do together. At the heart of this audiobook is a single, seismic idea. Your thoughts shape your reality, not metaphorically, literally. What you focus on expands. What you believe becomes the lens through which you interpret life. What you assume becomes the code that your subconscious runs on autopilot. And here's the key. Most of your thoughts are not actually yours. They are inherited, recycled, installed by culture, trauma, family, media, and repetition. The vast majority of your inner dialogue was written by someone else. But once you realize this, you are no longer a victim of the mind. You become its master. And once you master your thoughts, you master your emotions, your habits, your relationships, your future, your life. That's not hype. That's neuroscience, psychology, and ancient wisdom converging into one undeniable truth. Everything starts in the mind. Everything. We live in a world that tells us to change our jobs, our bodies, our partners, our cities. But what if the real revolution was invisible? What if the change that matters most happens in silence, in thought, in the space between stimulus and response? That's where your power lives. That's where identity is shaped. That's where reality bends. The truth is, your mind is not just a storage unit for memories. It is a creation engine, a reality generator, and it is always active, always shaping. The question is, are you shaping it consciously or unconsciously? That's what this book will teach you. How to stop being run by inherited thoughts and start thinking in ways that align with your highest self. You'll learn how to dismantle limiting beliefs, regulate emotional patterns, rewrite subconscious scripts, and elevate the mental blueprint that defines your experience of reality. Let's talk about how to use this audiobook for maximum impact. First and foremost, don't rush it. This is not fast food for the soul. It's a multi-course meal, rich, layered, and nourishing. Each chapter is designed to build on the last. Think of it as a journey, not a sprint. Pause when you feel something resonate. Rewind sections that trigger insight. Reflect. Journal. Meditate. This is not just a book to be heard. It's a book to be lived. And yes, some parts may challenge you. You might feel resistance. That's not a sign to stop. That's a sign that you've hit gold. Growth often arrives disguised as discomfort. So when you feel the urge to skip ahead or tune out, pause instead. Breathe. Stay with it. Because the part you want to avoid is often the part that holds your breakthrough. As you move through this audiobook, you'll notice a structure designed to guide you through a complete transformation. Each chapter dives deep into a core theme: the nature of thought, emotional mastery, subconscious programming, the illusion of control, the power of presence, and ultimately, the integration of mind and self. You'll encounter ancient teachings alongside modern neuroscience. You'll hear stories that reflect your own. You'll receive tools, real practical tools, that you can apply immediately. But more than anything, you'll be invited to meet yourself at a deeper level than ever before. To remember what the noise of the world made you forget. That you are the creator. That you are the consciousness behind the curtain. That your mind, when mastered, becomes a portal to a life of clarity, meaning, and freedom. This audiobook is for the seekers, the doers, the overthinkers, the empaths, the burned out, the rising. It's for anyone who has ever felt stuck, confused, overwhelmed, or disconnected, and who's finally ready to break through. It's for those who are tired of surviving and ready to thrive. It's for those who suspect there's more to life than hustle and numbness, and who want to live with power, peace, and presence. And most of all, it's for those who are ready to reclaim their minds, reclaim their stories, and reclaim their lives. If that's you, then welcome. You are exactly where you're meant to be. Before we dive into Chapter 1, I want to leave you with one truth. It's simple, but it will echo through everything you hear in this book. You are not your thoughts. You are the thinker of your thoughts. And that distinction, when understood and embodied, is the key to everything. Once you see that, your old limitations crumble. Your past no longer defines you. Your future becomes open, flexible, and alive. You stop trying to fix the world around you and start upgrading the world within you. And when the world within you shifts, everything outside begins to shift with it. That's not magic. It's alignment. And it's yours for the taking. So, let's begin this journey, not just of listening, but of remembering. Not just of learning, but of transforming. Not just of mastering thoughts, but of becoming the master of your mind, your life, and your destiny. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Thought-Driven Life. The nature of thoughts are not merely fleeting sparks in the brain or random flickers of cognition. They are the architects of our experience, the invisible builders that craft the very reality we walk through. Every moment, our minds are generating a steady stream of thoughts, some conscious, some unconscious. And these thoughts are shaping how we interpret the world, how we feel about ourselves, and what we believe is possible. To understand this is to grasp the first key to personal transformation. Nothing in your external world has meaning until your mind gives it meaning. This is not philosophical fluff. It is a principle rooted in both ancient wisdom and modern science. Across disciplines from neuroscience to cognitive behavioral psychology, we are repeatedly shown that the way we think not only influences our emotional states, but also determines our behavioral patterns, our success, and ultimately, our destiny. It is our thoughts, not circumstances, that wield the most powerful influence over the shape of our lives. The world responds not to who we are externally, but to who we believe ourselves to be. And those beliefs arise from repeated thoughts, practiced over time until they become the lenses through which we see everything. To grasp the gravity of this truth, we must first examine the nature of thought itself. A thought, at its simplest, is a burst of electrical and chemical activity in the brain, an impulse traveling through the neural pathways carved by experience, environment, and repetition. But on a deeper level, thoughts are not static entities. They are fluid, malleable, and potent with creative energy. They are interpretations, judgments, images, expectations, memories, and fantasies. They can be rational or irrational, empowering or destructive, vivid or vague. Yet, regardless of their nature, each thought has the power to influence the emotional landscape we live in. When we experience a stimulus, a comment from someone, a setback at work, a random memory, it's not the event itself that dictates our response, but the thought we attach to it. That thought, in turn, triggers a chemical reaction in the body. A negative thought may prompt cortisol and adrenaline, creating stress and agitation, while a positive one might induce dopamine or oxytocin, leading to feelings of calm, motivation, or joy. And because our minds are meaning-making machines, we are constantly interpreting reality through this stream of thought, emotion, reaction. Layering our raw experiences with subjective significance, this is where the illusion of objectivity begins to dissolve. We often believe we are responding to the truth of a situation, when in reality, we are reacting to the story we are telling ourselves about it. Imagine two people stuck in traffic. One sees it as a disaster, an interruption to their schedule, a reason to stew in frustration. The other sees it as an unexpected opportunity to listen to a podcast, reflect, or simply rest. The same event, yet two vastly different experiences, because the thoughts attached to the event were different. This illustrates the principle that thoughts are not passive. They are active forces shaping the fabric of our emotional and behavioral reality. Over time, these habitual thought responses hardwire our brains. Neural pathways, like trails in a forest, become worn and deepened with frequent use. If we repeatedly respond with fear, criticism, or pessimism, we create a brain optimized for anxiety and defeat. Conversely, if we consistently practice gratitude, curiosity, and resilience, we construct a mind prepared to seek opportunity and growth. In this way, our thoughts are both the sculptor and the clay. They shape us even as we are shaping them. How thoughts shape reality. But this shaping is not done in isolation. Our beliefs about ourselves, about life, about other people, these too are forged in the crucible of thought. A belief is simply a thought we've rehearsed so many times that we no longer question it. It feels like fact. And yet, beliefs can be completely arbitrary, sometimes inherited from childhood or absorbed from cultural influences, media, or the unspoken rules of our social environments. A child who repeatedly hears they are lazy, annoying, or not smart enough begins to think these thoughts, and over time, those thoughts solidify into self-concepts. That child grows into an adult who unconsciously acts out those beliefs, never applying for the job they want, sabotaging relationships, or avoiding challenges, not because of who they truly are, but because of who they've been conditioned to think they are. The tragedy is not that life is unfair. It's that many of us never question the narratives we've unknowingly adopted. We live under the weight of thoughts we didn't choose, allowing them to dictate the boundaries of our existence. This is the silent tyranny of unexamined thinking. The truth is, most people are not living their lives. They are living their thoughts. And these thoughts often come from the past, from pain, from fear, from inherited patterns that no longer serve them. So, the first step toward reclaiming power is awareness. You must learn to become the observer of your thoughts, to step back from the constant mental noise and ask, is this thought true? Is it useful? Is it kind? Is it mine? This practice of awareness is the doorway to liberation. It allows us to disrupt the automatic pathways and choose new ones. When you realize you are not your thoughts, that you can witness them, question them, and redirect them, you begin to access a space of immense creative potential. You stop being a victim of your mental programming and start becoming its author. And with that authorship comes responsibility. To think deliberately, to think powerfully, and to think in ways that align with the life you desire to create. To understand how thoughts shape reality, we must acknowledge that the world we perceive is not the world as it is, but the world as we are. Each of us carries a mental filter, shaped by our past, our emotions, our beliefs, that colors every interaction, every opportunity, every challenge. If you believe that people are inherently untrustworthy, you will find evidence to support that belief everywhere. You will interpret neutral behavior as suspicious, dismiss kindness as manipulation, and unconsciously push others away. Your thought creates a self-fulfilling prophecy, reinforcing itself through the selective perception of data. On the other hand, if you hold the thought that people are generally good and trustworthy, you will see generosity, warmth, and sincerity where others see threat. In both cases, the world conforms to your expectations, not because the external world changes, but because your interpretation of it does. This is the essence of cognitive bias, and while it can limit us, it also empowers us. Because if thoughts can distort, they can also illuminate. This concept is echoed in quantum physics, where the observer effect suggests that the mere act of observation influences the outcome of an experiment. While this may seem distant from our day-to-day lives, the metaphor is clear. Consciousness affects reality. What we focus on expands. What we expect, we tend to receive. Our thoughts send signals into the world through our tone, body language, energy, and decisions that shape how others respond to us. A person who believes in their own worth will carry themselves differently. They will speak more confidently, take more risks, and attract more respect. This is not mystical. It's psychological. Confidence, resilience, creativity, they are all cultivated in the mind before they manifest in the world. So, when you begin to think differently, you start to behave differently. And as your behavior changes, your environment responds in kind. Change begins within, not outside. And this is why thought mastery is the foundation of all lasting transformation. The inner origins of change. But transformation doesn't occur through inspiration alone. It demands consistent inner work. The path to changing your life begins not with fixing circumstances, but with shifting perception. You might believe that if your job improved, your relationships healed, or your finances expanded, then you'd feel better, more empowered, more whole. But this is a backwards model. The truth is, when you begin to think better, more aligned, expansive, loving, and clear, those external areas begin to shift as a reflection of your new internal state. The outer world becomes a mirror of your mental clarity. Your energy becomes magnetic to new possibilities. Doors open not because life suddenly becomes easier, but because you've trained your mind to see them and to believe you deserve to walk through them. When you stop fighting what is and begin to align with what can be, when you no longer dwell in limitation, but rise into potential, then your thoughts become the compass, not the cage. This inward shift is where all meaningful change originates. The mistake many people make is trying to change their lives by rearranging the furniture of the external world while ignoring the architecture of the mind. But nothing sticks if it's not supported by a transformed inner landscape. Consider the person who loses weight through sheer willpower, but still sees themselves as unworthy. They will likely sabotage their progress. Or the entrepreneur who achieves success, but is still plagued by imposter syndrome, because deep down, they have not shifted the foundational thoughts that drive their self-perception. Lasting change is rooted not in actions alone, but in identity. And identity is shaped by thought. So if you want to change your life in any significant way, you must begin by changing your thoughts about who you are and what you are capable of. This leads us to an empowering truth. We are not prisoners of our past thoughts. We are creators of new ones. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, proves that change is not only possible, it's biological. Every time you choose a new thought, every time you challenge an old belief, you are laying down new neural pathways. These pathways, when reinforced through repetition and emotional engagement, become the new defaults. It's like carving a new trail through a forest. The more you walk it, the clearer it becomes. At first, it takes effort. You may forget. You may fall back into old ways. But each time you return to the new path, it gets easier. Over time, it becomes second nature. This is how thought mastery becomes life mastery, not through perfection, but through persistence. Through the daily decision to think on purpose, to choose thoughts that uplift, empower, and align with your highest vision. Ultimately, to master your life, you must master your inner world. This begins with understanding the immense power of thought, not as a fleeting spark, but as a foundational force. Every thought is a seed. What you plant in your mind grows in your life. So, plant intentionally. Cultivate thoughts of strength, of possibility, of love, of vision. Reject the weeds of fear, doubt, and comparison. Water your mental garden with attention, presence, and belief. And remember, the mind is everything. Change it, and everything changes. Your reality is not waiting to be discovered. It is waiting to be created by you, one thought at a time. Chapter 2. The Power of Mental Conditioning. How Conditioning Shapes Identity. From the moment we open our eyes to the world, we begin to absorb messages that mold our sense of self. These messages are not always obvious. They are embedded in the tone of a parent's voice, the reaction of a teacher to our mistake, the expectations of society, and the invisible currents of approval or rejection that swirl around us. Over time, these subtle cues become internalized. We begin to craft a mental blueprint of who we believe we are and what we think we're capable of, based not on truth, but on repetition. This is mental conditioning, the process by which thoughts, beliefs, and emotional responses become ingrained through repeated exposure. Much like physical conditioning shapes the muscles of the body, mental conditioning sculpts the muscles of the mind, often unconsciously. Every repeated thought, especially those tinged with emotion, etches itself more deeply into the neural pathways of our brains, forming the cognitive architecture that determines how we see ourselves and how we relate to the world. Consider a child who is consistently told to be quiet, who is subtly dismissed when offering ideas, and who grows up around adults who mock ambition or creative expression. This child, without ever consciously deciding it, may internalize the belief that their voice does not matter. They may become hesitant to speak up, to share opinions, or to pursue paths that require self-confidence. This self-limiting behavior isn't a reflection of truth, but of conditioning. The same is true for someone raised in an environment of scarcity where money was always tight and success seemed reserved for others. They may carry an unconscious belief that abundance is out of reach, that struggle is inevitable, that striving is noble but achieving is for someone else. These beliefs, once installed, become filters, screening what we notice, how we interpret events, and what we believe is possible for ourselves. The conditioning runs so deep that we often don't realize our limitations are inherited, not chosen. This is where identity begins to crystallize, not as a fixed essence, but as a bundle of rehearsed thoughts, memories, and emotions. Most people think identity is innate, that it springs forth fully formed and unchangeable. But in truth, our sense of self is a layered product of internalized messages, cultural programming, and repetitive mental patterns. The quiet person might have once been exuberant. The angry person might have once been tender. The fearful person might have once been bold. Who we are today is a reflection of what we've been conditioned to think, feel, and expect, not necessarily who we truly are. This is both sobering and empowering. Sobering, because it reveals how many of our self-perceptions are inherited illusions. Empowering, because it means identity is not fixed. It can be reshaped through conscious effort. We are not doomed to live out the scripts written for us in childhood or culture. The mind, once conditioned, can be reconditioned. The same repetition that created our limitations can be used to unlock our liberation. Wiring thought through conscious repetition. If we accept that our mental frameworks are not permanent fixtures, but malleable structures, the question becomes, how do we change them? The answer lies in the deliberate use of repetition and conscious attention. The brain, with its remarkable capacity for neuroplasticity, is capable of forming new pathways throughout life. But these pathways don't emerge spontaneously. They require consistent thought patterns reinforced over time. Imagine walking through a forest. The first time you step onto untamed ground, the journey is slow and unsure. But if you walk that same path every day, it begins to clear. The weeds flatten, the dirt compacts, and a trail is formed. In the same way, every time you entertain a thought, especially one charged with belief or emotion, You are carving a neural path in your brain. The more often you walk that path, the easier it becomes to travel. This is how conditioning happens. But unlike the unconscious conditioning of childhood, we now have the power to choose which mental trails we want to blaze and which ones we want to abandon. One of the most effective tools for rewiring the mind is the use of affirmations, repeated positive statements that challenge and replace limiting beliefs. This isn't about blind optimism or deluding yourself. It's about interrupting destructive thought loops with new empowering scripts. When you say, "I am worthy," or "I trust myself," or "I create opportunities," you are not pretending something is true. You are building the mental and emotional infrastructure to make it true. These statements, when repeated with sincerity and consistency, begin to shift your self-image. At first, they may feel uncomfortable or even false, because they contradict your old conditioning. But that discomfort is not a sign of failure. It's a sign that you're stepping outside the bounds of your former mental programming. With each repetition, you weaken the old pathway and strengthen the new one. Over time, what once felt unnatural becomes second nature. You begin to think, feel, and act in alignment with your chosen thoughts, rather than your inherited ones. Visualization is another powerful method for reconditioning the mind. When you vividly imagine a scenario, your brain activates many of the same regions it would if you were experiencing that scenario in real life. Athletes use this to mentally rehearse perfect performance. Entrepreneurs use it to build confidence before major presentations. You can use it to see yourself as calm, successful, courageous, whatever you wish to embody. The key is detail and emotional engagement. When you visualize not just what you want, but how it feels to already have it, you engage your subconscious mind in a powerful rehearsal of possibility. This primes your mind to notice relevant opportunities, take aligned actions, and behave in ways that reinforce the imagined identity. Over time, the line between imagination and reality blurs, not because you've disconnected from truth, but because you've elevated what's possible. By conditioning your mind to accept a new standard, you lead your life into new territory. You become the evidence of your own transformation. The daily discipline of thought mastery. Mental conditioning is not a one-time event. It's a lifelong practice. Just as you wouldn't expect your body to stay strong without regular movement and nourishment, you cannot expect your mind to remain sharp, focused, and aligned without deliberate training. This is the daily discipline of thought mastery, the commitment to monitor, challenge, and refine your internal dialogue every day. It begins with awareness, catching yourself in moments of unconscious thinking, noticing the stories you're telling yourself, and asking whether they are true or useful. This isn't about shaming yourself for negative thoughts. It's about becoming aware enough to choose differently. Each moment of awareness is a moment of power. You may not control the first thought that arises, but you can choose the second one. You can choose to pivot, to reframe, to speak to yourself in a tone of compassion instead of criticism. This requires presence, and presence requires intention. You must decide that your mental state is worth your attention, that it is the foundation upon which all success and peace are built. Building this discipline into your life involves creating rituals, consistent practices that anchor your mind in clarity and purpose. Morning routines are especially powerful because they set the tone for your entire day. Before the world begins to shape your thoughts, you must shape them yourself. This might include journaling, where you write down empowering thoughts, intentions, and reflections. It might include meditation, where you sit in stillness and observe the patterns of your mind without judgment. It might include reading, where you consume ideas that stretch your perspective and elevate your vision. Whatever the form, the purpose is the same, to direct the mind rather than be directed by it. As you strengthen this practice, you begin to notice subtle changes. You react less impulsively. You bounce back from setbacks more quickly. You speak to yourself more kindly. These changes may seem small, but they accumulate into a profound shift in identity and experience. You are no longer a passenger in your mental landscape. You are the architect. Yet, discipline is not about rigidity or perfection. It is about returning. You will falter. You will forget. Old patterns will sometimes resurface. This is not failure. It is part of the process. What matters is that you return to your center, that you recommit to your highest thoughts, that you forgive yourself and begin again. Each return is a victory. Each conscious redirection strengthens your mastery. Over time, the effort required diminishes because the new pathways become familiar trails. You find joy in the practice itself, not just in the outcomes. Your mind becomes a sanctuary rather than a battleground, and in that space, you unlock a deeper form of freedom. The freedom to respond rather than react, to create rather than conform, to live by design rather than default. This is the fruit of mental conditioning done consciously. It is not glamorous, but it is transformational. It is the quiet, daily work of reshaping your inner world so that your outer world reflects your truth, not your programming. Chapter 3. Emotional Alchemy, Transforming Feelings into Power. Emotions as messengers, not masters. Emotions are not accidental glitches in the human experience. They are intricate messengers crafted by evolution to communicate what the mind often struggles to articulate. Yet, in modern life, we are conditioned to fear them, suppress them, or mislabel them. Anger is mistaken for danger, sadness for weakness, fear for failure. We grow up hearing phrases like, "Don't cry," "Toughen up," or "Stop being so sensitive," not realizing that every time we dismiss an emotion, we silence a truth that our psyche is trying to express. Emotions arise in response to our thoughts and interpretations of the world, and they act as internal guidance systems, offering us immediate feedback about our needs, values, and subconscious narratives. They are not our enemies, nor are they inherently irrational. Rather, they are intelligent, encoded signals that, when deciphered, reveal critical information about how we are perceiving reality, and how reality is aligning or misaligning with our internal compass. To understand emotions as messages, we must first stop treating them obstacles. When sadness arises, instead of numbing it or burying it beneath distractions, we can ask, what is this sadness pointing to? Perhaps it signals a loss that hasn't been honored, a value that's been compromised, or a truth that has not yet been spoken. When anxiety creeps in, rather than battling it with forced calmness or avoidance, we can inquire, what future am I imagining that feels threatening? Emotions don't appear to punish us. They arise to illuminate the stories we are telling ourselves, some helpful, others outdated. If we can slow down long enough to listen without judgment, we begin to unearth the root systems from which our feelings grow. This shift, viewing emotions as informational rather than inconvenient, is transformative. It turns every emotional experience, even the difficult ones, into an opportunity for deeper self-awareness. What makes this process powerful is that it decentralizes emotion from being a master that commands us to react, and instead positions it as a messenger that we can learn from. When we are mastered by emotion, we become impulsive, reactive, and confused. But when we become curious about emotion, we reclaim our power. Consider someone who becomes angry in a conversation and immediately lashes out. Here, emotion is in control. But the person who notices their rising anger and asks, "What value is being violated right now?" steps into the space between stimulus and response. That space is where growth occurs. The more we practice observing our emotions without identifying with them, the more skillfully we can navigate the emotional terrain of life. We move from emotional slavery to emotional sovereignty, not by suppressing feelings, but by understanding them deeply. This is emotional alchemy at its core, taking the raw, messy data of our inner world and transforming it into conscious, empowered insight. The mind-emotion feedback loop. To master emotions, we must understand the symbiotic loop between thought and feeling. Thoughts create emotional responses, and emotional states reinforce thought patterns. This loop is often unconscious and incredibly fast. A thought like, "I'm not good enough," can evoke shame within seconds, and that emotional state will then summon more self-critical thoughts, creating a self-perpetuating spiral. The same loop can be used to our advantage when we become intentional. A single empowering thought, "I have everything I need to face this," can initiate a wave of confidence or calm that reshapes our entire mental lens. But to do this effectively, we must bring awareness to how our thoughts trigger emotional states and how those states influence our behavior and worldview. Without awareness, we live in reaction. With awareness, we live in creation. This feedback loop plays out in real time in countless subtle ways. Think of how a person's posture can shift based on emotion. A slouched stance with drooped shoulders when feeling defeated, a lifted chest and alert gaze when confident. But what's more intriguing is that the reverse is also true. Shifting the body, standing tall, breathing deeply, relaxing the face, can send signals to the brain that alter emotional state. The mind and body are not separate systems. They are deeply integrated components of a single feedback organism. This insight gives us enormous leverage. We can intervene in the feedback loop at any point. We can interrupt negative emotions by changing our thinking, altering our physical state, or breathing consciously. These small interventions compound. A single breath taken in mindfulness can disrupt an entire cascade of reactive behavior. A reframed thought can shift a week-long spiral into a moment of growth. What this loop reveals is that emotions are not random forces that descend upon us. They are products of perception. When we shift perception, we shift emotion. This is not about denial or forced positivity. It is about expanding the lens through which we view reality so that we can find emotional options beyond reactivity. For example, instead of thinking, "This always happens to me," which may invoke helplessness or rage, we might reframe the moment as, "This is challenging, but I have overcome worse." That one shift can generate a feeling of resilience rather than defeat. Over time, these micro-adjustments rewire the emotional default settings of the brain. The person who was once easily triggered becomes more grounded. The person who used to fear conflict begins to see it as a chance to clarify truth. The feedback loop becomes a cycle of empowerment, not disempowerment. Emotional mastery, then, is not the absence of feelings. It is the ability to steer the feeling mind loop with increasing awareness and intention. Transmutation through emotional presence. True transformation doesn't come from escaping emotions, but from moving through them with presence. To transmute emotion is not to bypass it. It is to feel it fully without resistance and allow it to evolve into a higher state. Emotions, when allowed to move freely, naturally change form. Grief turns into gratitude when we honor what was lost. Anger transforms into passion when we acknowledge the underlying value being defended. Fear morphs into courage when we step toward what we fear with consciousness. This process of emotional transmutation requires presence, not distraction, not suppression, not analysis alone, but the raw, unfiltered experience of what is arising in the body and mind. Presence means staying with the discomfort, breathing into it, and giving it the space to unravel on its own terms. It is in that spacious awareness that emotion softens and insight emerges. Presence is a skill, one that must be cultivated with patience and practice. In a world addicted to speed, noise, and constant stimulation, stillness is a radical act. To sit with sadness without needing to fix it, to feel shame without spiraling into self-hatred, to allow fear without shrinking from it. This is emotional maturity. It is also liberation. For when we truly sit with our emotions, we find they are not as terrifying as we imagined. They pass, they shift, they teach, and most importantly, they heal. When we become present with emotion, we unlock the deeper wisdom that lives beneath the surface. For instance, beneath envy may lie a buried desire we haven't admitted. Beneath irritation may be a boundary we failed to set. Beneath despair may be a call to reconnect with meaning. These insights don't emerge when we judge or escape emotion. They arise when we sit with emotion as an honored guest, however unwelcome it may feel. This process of presence allows us to move from reaction to integration. An emotion that is reacted to unconsciously often leads to destructive behavior or lingering pain. But an emotion that is held in awareness becomes integrated into the self, woven into a deeper understanding of who we are and what we value. Integration means we do not fragment ourselves into good and bad parts. It means we hold all parts of our experience with dignity. When we do this consistently, something beautiful happens. We become emotionally whole. No longer at war with ourselves, we carry both light and shadow with grace. We become more grounded, more available to others, and more resilient in the face of life's uncertainty. The ability to stay present with emotion, then, is not just a personal practice. It is a superpower in relationships, in leadership, and in creativity. It allows us to act from clarity rather than compulsion, to speak with authenticity rather than fear, and to love without condition. Chapter 4. The Architecture of Belief. Rewiring the Inner Blueprint. The Origins of Belief. Childhood Scripts and Mental Conditioning. The beliefs we hold about ourselves, others, and the world do not appear by accident. They are cultivated layer by layer through a lifetime of experiences, especially in our early years when the subconscious mind is most impressionable. From the moment we enter the world, we begin absorbing the stories around us like a sponge. Stories told not only through words, but through tone, facial expression, body language, and behavior. A child doesn't just hear that they are loved or unloved. They feels it in how consistently they are held, how attentively they are listened to, how often their emotions are validated. In this delicate developmental phase, we form internal scripts, core beliefs, that become the mental framework through which we interpret all future experiences. These beliefs, such as, I am enough, I am not safe, or my voice doesn't matter, are not chosen consciously. They are absorbed and adopted, then buried so deeply that we often mistake them for truth itself. These subconscious patterns go on to shape our identity, limit or expand our potential, and influence every decision we make. Yet most of us remain unaware of their origin or power. This hidden architecture of belief begins with how we make meaning as children. A child sees their parents arguing and might internalize, I cause problems. A teacher's harsh criticism might be encoded as, I'm not smart. A moment of neglect can become a lifetime of feeling invisible. These early impressions form neural networks in the brain that become reinforced through repetition. Every time we encounter an experience that aligns with the belief, such as being excluded from a group or rejected in love, it strengthens the original pattern. The brain, seeking consistency and predictability, filters out contradictory evidence and highlights the familiar. It's not that new possibilities don't exist. It's that the mind, clinging to its foundational scripts, selectively perceives reality in a way that confirms what it already believes. This is the essence of confirmation bias, and it is not merely a cognitive quirk. It is a survival mechanism rooted in the brain's desire to maintain internal coherence. The tragedy is that many of these beliefs, formed in moments of confusion, pain, or immaturity, continue to dictate our adult lives, often without being questioned. The result is a life lived within invisible walls. We pursue careers, relationships, and goals that align not with our true desires, but with the safety zones of our beliefs. Someone who unconsciously believes, "I must earn love by overgiving," will find themselves in relationships where they are constantly depleted. Someone who holds the belief, "Success will make me worthy," may achieve great things but feel perpetually unfulfilled. The beliefs we inherit and adopt become self-fulfilling prophecies, not because they are true, but because we unknowingly act them out. To change our lives, then, we must first shine a light on these subconscious scripts. We must trace the roots of our beliefs, not to dwell on the past, but to liberate ourselves from it. This process begins with awareness, catching the internal dialogue, questioning its origins, and daring to imagine that another belief could be possible. It is not easy work, for these beliefs often form the foundation of our identity, but it is necessary work if we are to become the authors of our own story, rather than the actors in a script written long ago. Breaking the illusion. Challenging limiting beliefs with conscious rebellion. The human mind does not like to be wrong, especially about its most cherished assumptions. Once a belief has taken root, the ego clings to it with ferocity, defending it as though it were a vital organ. And in a sense it is, for beliefs shape our reality so thoroughly that challenging them can feel like a form of psychological death. Yet, growth demands this exact kind of death. The death of false identities, the burial of limiting paradigms, the courageous dismantling of mental walls that no longer serve us. To challenge a belief is not simply to think a different thought. It is to unravel a structure that has perhaps kept us safe or defined us for decades. It requires us to be both compassionate and ruthless with ourselves. Compassionate, because our beliefs were formed in response to real pain or fear. Ruthless, because we must be willing to disrupt the comfort of the familiar in order to claim the freedom of the true. This disruption begins with observation. We must become detectives of our own mind, paying attention to the patterns of thought and emotion that arise in moments of challenge. Do we retreat when confronted with success? Do we sabotage intimacy the moment it deepens? Do we shrink from visibility even as we long to be seen? These patterns are not random. They are clues. Behind each one lies a belief, perhaps the belief that we are unworthy, unlovable, incapable, or fundamentally flawed. The next step is to interrogate the belief as if it were on trial. We must ask, is this really true? Who told me this, and were they right? What if the opposite were true? What evidence exists that contradicts this belief? What would I do if I didn't believe this thought? These questions create cognitive dissonance, and while that discomfort may be unsettling, it is also the crack through which the light of change enters. A belief cannot survive in the presence of persistent inquiry and contradictory experience. It must either evolve or dissolve. Once we've created this space of doubt, we can begin the process of consciously choosing new beliefs. This is where the power of neuroplasticity comes into play, the brain's ability to rewire itself based on new experiences and repeated thought patterns. A belief is nothing more than a thought repeated over time. So if we repeat a new empowering thought with emotional engagement and consistent action, it will eventually take root as a new belief. For example, if someone has long believed, "I'm not a leader," they can begin to plant the seed of a new belief. I have the capacity to lead with integrity and vision. At first, it will feel foreign, perhaps even dishonest. But with repetition, evidence, and aligned behavior, the mind begins to shift. Over time, the old neural pathways weaken and new ones strengthen. This is not about pretending or positive thinking alone. It is about intentionally rewiring the mind through a process of deliberate focus, emotional investment, and courageous action. To break the illusion of limiting belief is to engage in conscious rebellion, a bold refusal to be defined by outdated stories and a commitment to becoming the fullest, freest version of oneself. Rebuilding the blueprint, installing empowered beliefs through embodied practice. Once we have dismantled the old belief system, the question becomes, what do we build in its place? A void cannot sustain transformation. Nature abhors emptiness, and so does the mind. If we remove a limiting belief without installing a new one, we create a vacuum that the old belief will rush back to fill. Therefore, the process of rewiring the inner blueprint must include not only the removal of falsehoods, but the installation of truths, beliefs that empower, uplift, and reflect our evolving sense of identity. This rebuilding process is not purely mental. It must be embodied. The body must learn what the mind is learning. The nervous system must begin to trust the new belief, and that trust can only come through experience. If we are to believe, I am safe to express myself, we must actually practice expressing ourselves in real contexts and survive the emotional vulnerability it entails. Belief is not formed in theory. It is forged in action. Embodiment begins with aligning thought, feeling, and behavior. We can't simply repeat affirmations while living in contradiction with them. If someone affirms, I am confident, but spends each day shrinking from challenge or deferring to others, the body registers the incongruence and resists the new belief. But if that same person, while affirming their confidence, chooses to speak up in a meeting, maintain eye contact, and take initiative, the body begins to gather evidence that supports the new belief. This evidence accumulates over time, and with each courageous act, the nervous system rewires itself to trust a new emotional baseline. This is why embodiment matters. It is not enough to believe with the mind. We must embody with the self. Practices such as visualization, breathwork, movement, and somatic experiencing can accelerate this process by integrating belief into the physical, emotional, and energetic layers of our being. Perhaps most importantly, rebuilding the blueprint requires consistency. The subconscious mind learns through repetition, not intensity. A single breakthrough moment may offer insight, but it is the daily practice, the consistent, deliberate reaffirmation of who we are becoming, that creates lasting change. Rituals become crucial. Morning reflections, journaling exercises, evening gratitude, body movement, spoken affirmations, visualizations, each one reinforcing the new identity. Over time, these practices anchor the belief so deeply that it becomes second nature. It is no longer something we hope for. It is something we are. And once a belief becomes embodied identity, life begins to reorganize itself around it. We find ourselves attracted to new relationships, new opportunities, new paths, ones that mirror the empowered blueprint we have built within. What was once unimaginable becomes natural. This is the final beautiful step of belief work. The realization that we are not who we were told we were, not who we feared we were, but who we decide to become through conscious embodied belief. The mind is everything, but when aligned with belief, the mind becomes limitless. Chapter 5. Emotional Mastery, Navigating the Inner Ocean. The language of emotion, understanding the inner compass emotions, are not arbitrary fluctuations of mood, nor inconvenient byproducts of human vulnerability. They are precise, intelligent signals crafted by evolution to guide, warn, and inform us. To master the mind, one must first learn to decode the language of emotion with the same seriousness and respect as one would a map through unknown territory. Each emotion, whether joy, anger, sadness, fear, or shame, acts as a message from the subconscious, signaling unmet needs, boundaries crossed, or values affirmed. Yet for many, emotions are treated as enemies rather than messengers. We suppress anger, deny sadness, fear itself, and confuse happiness with fleeting gratification. This misinterpretation stems not from personal failure, but from collective conditioning, which often teaches emotional suppression over literacy. From childhood, we are often rewarded for being good, which often meant being quiet, compliant, and emotionally neutral. In such an environment, authentic emotional expression becomes distorted, buried, or vilified. The result is a generation of adults disconnected from their inner compass, navigating life based on intellectual analysis rather than emotional intelligence, and thereby missing the deeper truths embedded in feeling. To understand emotion is to reconnect with the body, for emotion, by its very etymology, emotion, meaning energy in motion, is a somatic experience. When we feel grief, it tightens the throat, swells the chest, or fills the eyes with tears. When we feel anger, it burns in the belly, clenches the jaw, or sharpens the gaze. These are not random sensations. They are physiological truths. The body speaks in sensation, and emotion is its voice. Ignoring it is not only unwise but dangerous, as unprocessed emotions do not disappear. They are stored in the tissues, woven into the posture, buried in the nervous system, and eventually manifest as chronic tension, illness, or behavioral compulsions. A person who represses sadness may suffer from persistent fatigue or depression, while someone who denies their anger may struggle with boundaries or passive-aggressive tendencies. These psychosomatic outcomes highlight the necessity of emotional fluency. Just as one learns to read or write, one must learn to recognize, name, feel, and respond to emotions with compassion and curiosity, rather than fear or judgment. Emotional mastery does not mean controlling how we feel, but deepening our ability to listen, understand, and respond with wisdom. The mind, in its quest for order, often seeks to intellectualize emotions, to dissect them into causes and assign blame. But emotion precedes cognition. A baby cries before it knows what sadness is. A dog trembles in fear without a concept of danger. Emotion is primal, raw, and nonverbal. This means that emotional healing and mastery require more than mental analysis. They require presence. They demand that we sit with the feeling, allow it to move through us, and trust that it has wisdom to offer. To do this, we must create emotional space, quiet moments without distraction, time to reflect, movement practices to access the body, and safe environments where truth can emerge. When we become fluent in this language, emotion ceases to be something that happens to us and becomes something that happens for us. We can then use it as a compass, to steer away from dishonesty, to lean into connection, to uphold boundaries, and to live with greater authenticity. Mastery of the mind is impossible without fluency in emotion, for it is emotion that gives meaning to thought, and it is emotion that transforms knowledge into experience. The emotional saboteurs, patterns of reaction, and the role of triggers. Though emotion in itself is neutral, simply a signal, our unconscious reactions to emotion often create chaos. These reactions, rooted in past trauma or unresolved inner conflict, form what we call emotional saboteurs, patterned automatic responses that distort perception and provoke self-defeating behavior. For instance, someone with a fear of abandonment may interpret a delayed text as rejection and respond with anger or withdrawal. Another with a buried shame wound may lash out in defensiveness when given feedback. These reactions are not rooted in present reality, but in past pain, reactivated by emotional triggers. A trigger is not inherently dangerous. It is simply a doorway into unresolved wounds. But without awareness, we walk through that doorway unconsciously, letting the wounded part of us take the wheel. This results in miscommunication, relational strain, impulsive decisions, and the reinforcement of the very wounds we seek to avoid. The same event may provoke wildly different reactions in different people, depending on the beliefs and emotional scars they carry. Thus, our reactions are rarely about the event itself. They are about the meaning we assign, filtered through old stories and unhealed parts. To gain mastery over these saboteurs, we must first name them. Each person has a unique emotional landscape shaped by experience, and within it are familiar shadows, patterns that emerge in stress, conflict, or vulnerability. These might include perfectionism, people-pleasing, emotional shutdown, over-apologizing, chronic anger, or addiction to validation. These are not character flaws, but adaptive strategies, originally developed to secure safety, love, or acceptance in childhood. The child who learned that love is conditional may become the adult who overfunctions in relationships. The one who felt unseen may crave constant praise. These adaptations served a purpose, but when left unexamined, they become prisons. Emotional mastery requires that we bring these patterns into the light, not with shame, but with empathy. We must ask, what was I protecting myself from when I developed this reaction? What did I need that I didn't get? How can I now meet that need in a healthy, conscious way? This self-inquiry shifts us from victimhood to empowerment, from reactivity to responsibility. It allows us to rewrite the narrative and choose our responses rather than being controlled by them. One of the most powerful tools for this transformation is the pause. In the heat of emotion, the nervous system floods with stress chemicals, narrowing our focus and pulling us into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. But if we can insert even a brief pause, a breath, a moment of silence, a conscious step back, we interrupt the automatic loop. That pause creates space for awareness. It allows the prefrontal cortex to re-engage, bringing reason and reflection back online. In this space, we can ask ourselves, what am I really feeling? What story am I telling myself? Is this reaction helping or harming? Over time, the more we practice this pause, the more power we regain over our emotional lives. We begin to see that our triggers are not enemies. They are invitations. Each trigger points to a part of us that wants to be seen, heard, and healed. When we stop fighting our emotional patterns and begin to engage with them consciously, we shift from being puppets of our past to powerful creators of our present. Mastery is not the absence of triggers, but the ability to respond to them with presence, clarity, and compassion. Transmutation. Turning emotional energy into growth and power. Emotion, especially the intense and uncomfortable kind, contains vast reserves of energy. Anger is fire. Grief is water. Fear is wind. These elemental forces, if unchanneled, become destructive, but if transmuted, they become transformative. Transmutation is the alchemical process of converting raw emotional energy into elevated states of consciousness, turning grief into depth, anger into courage, fear into clarity, shame into compassion. This is the essence of emotional mastery, not suppression, not indulgence, but transformation. Every great artist, leader, or healer has learned this art, whether consciously or not. They have felt deeply and turned that depth into beauty, truth, and action. It is no coincidence that the most powerful voices in the world are often born from profound emotional struggle. Suffering, when met with awareness and creativity, becomes a catalyst. It burns away illusion and reveals truth. It humbles the ego and awakens the soul. But this transmutation cannot occur if we reject the emotion or remain trapped in its story. It requires us to fully feel, fully witness, and then consciously channel. The process begins by honoring the emotion as sacred. Instead of labeling it as good or bad, we approach it with reverence, asking, "What gift do you carry?" In anger, we may discover a violated boundary that needs restoring. In grief, we may touch the depth of our love. In fear, we may uncover the need for preparation or discernment. By listening deeply, we receive the message the emotion brings. Once received, the energy of the emotion can be directed into words, movement, decision, or change. A person consumed with anxiety might channel that energy into building structure or routines. Someone grappling with shame may use that pain to develop empathy and become a guide for others. This is not bypassing. It is integration. It does not deny the emotion, but includes it as part of a larger, evolving self. As we practice this, we begin to trust our emotions, even the hard ones. We learn that no emotion is final, and all are transient. The storm always passes, and in its wake is clarity. We no longer fear feeling. We welcome it as part of the human journey. Ultimately, transmutation is about sovereignty. It is the shift from being ruled by emotion to ruling with it, becoming a conscious steward of our inner world. We cease blaming others for how we feel and instead take full ownership. This doesn't mean suppressing anger or denying sadness. It means knowing how to hold space for them, listen to them, and choose how to express them in alignment with our values. It means creating rituals for emotional processing, journaling, meditation, movement, artistic expression, so that emotion is not bottled or projected, but honored and expressed. It also means developing emotional resilience, the ability to return to center no matter what life throws at us. We don't wait for life to stop being hard. We become someone who can stay grounded in the storm. That is true power. When we learn to transmute emotion, we stop being victims of mood or circumstance. We become powerful creators, using every emotional experience as raw material for growth, connection, and purpose. In mastering emotion, we master the self, not by domination, but by devotion. Chapter 6. Belief Systems, the Hidden Architects of Reality. The genesis of belief, how mental models are formed. Every thought we think and every decision we make emerges from a deeply ingrained network of beliefs, internal truths we often accept without question. These beliefs operate like the unseen software of the mind, dictating behavior, shaping perception, and constructing our subjective reality. But these mental blueprints are not innate. They are the products of imprinting, repetition, and experience. From the earliest stages of life, we absorb beliefs through osmosis, watching our parents, listening to teachers, observing the world's response to our actions. A child repeatedly told they are too sensitive may internalize the belief that their feelings are a burden, suppressing emotional truth in order to be accepted. Another child rewarded only when achieving high grades may come to believe their worth hinges entirely on performance. These early messages become mental scripts, encoded not only cognitively, but somatically, forming the foundation upon which our adult identity is built. Because the brain seeks predictability and coherence, it clings to these beliefs, even when they are painful or limiting, preferring the discomfort of familiarity to the disorientation of change. Beliefs, therefore, are less about facts and more about survival. They provide a framework that allows us to navigate life with some measure of certainty, even if that certainty confines us. What makes beliefs especially potent is their ability to self-validate. Once a belief is formed, the mind becomes a selective filter, constantly scanning the environment for evidence to support it, while ignoring or minimizing contradictory information. A person who believes they are unworthy may overlook compliments, sabotage relationships, or fixate on minor criticisms to reinforce their internal narrative. This is not conscious deceit, but a function of the brain's pattern recognition system, which prioritizes consistency over accuracy. As a result, we rarely see the world as it is. We see it as we are. We project our beliefs outward, mistaking them for objective truth. The implications are profound. Our beliefs influence our emotional responses, determine our goals, define our limits, and dictate the quality of our relationships. They decide what we pursue, tolerate, avoid, or accept, and because they often dwell in the subconscious, many of our most influential beliefs operate without our awareness. Thus, the work of mental mastery requires that we become belief detectives, tracing our habits, reactions, and assumptions back to their roots, asking not only, "What do I believe?" but, "Where did this belief come from? And is it serving me now?" This journey of excavation must be undertaken with both courage and compassion. Challenging a belief is not just an intellectual exercise, it is a dismantling of the identity built around it. To question a core belief is to risk stepping into uncertainty, into a space where new truths may emerge, but where the scaffolding of the old self is no longer stable. This is why many people resist change, even when their current beliefs cause suffering. They fear not the loss of pain, but the loss of familiarity. Yet only by facing this discomfort can we begin to rebuild from a place of conscious choice. When we start to observe our beliefs with curiosity instead of identification, we create distance. That distance gives rise to clarity. And with clarity, transformation becomes not only possible but inevitable. We are not our beliefs. We are the creators of them. And what we create, we can uncreate and reshape into something truer, freer, and more aligned with who we are becoming. Limiting beliefs, the invisible chains that bind potential. Limiting beliefs are the silent saboteurs of growth. These are the internal convictions that cap our potential, narrow our vision, and define the perimeter of our lives. Often invisible and inherited, they masquerade as facts but are, in truth, deeply entrenched stories that no longer serve us. These beliefs might include, "I'm not good enough," "I can't trust people," "Success is for others," or "Love always leads to pain." They operate like background programs, running beneath the surface of consciousness, subtly dictating what we attempt, what we avoid, and how we interpret failure. Limiting beliefs are not born from weakness, but from protection. At some point in the past, they served a purpose: to shield us from disappointment, to keep us safe, to help us belong. But over time, the protective strategy fossilized into a prison, keeping us stuck in loops of self-doubt, fear, or resignation. The tragedy is not that we have these beliefs, but that we live by them as though they were immutable truths. In doing so, we limit not only what we do, but who we believe we are. The mind clings to limiting beliefs for several reasons. First, they provide predictability. If I believe I'm not meant for love, then every relationship failure confirms my worldview, and I'm protected from the deeper pain of vulnerability. Second, they offer a kind of twisted comfort. If I believe I'm not capable, I never have to risk failure by trying. Third, and most dangerously, limiting beliefs become fused with identity. They are no longer something we believe, they are who we are. To change them feels like death to the self we've known. This is why belief work requires more than logic. It demands emotional courage. To confront a limiting belief is to confront the pain it was built to conceal. It is to sit with the shame, fear, or grief beneath the surface, and to validate those feelings without allowing them to dictate our future. It is to say, yes, this belief once protected me, but now I choose something new. This process is not about forcing positivity or affirming fantasies. It is about truth. It is about discerning between the voice of the wounded past and the voice of empowered choice. One of the most effective ways to dismantle limiting beliefs is through evidence and experience. The mind clings to a belief until it encounters contradictory evidence strong enough to shake its foundation. This is where conscious action becomes crucial. If I believe I'm bad at public speaking, I must choose to speak anyway, perhaps in small, safe environments, and allow myself to succeed, even slightly. These small wins become cracks in the wall of the old belief. With each new experience, the belief loses power. Over time, we begin to rewrite the internal narrative. Maybe I'm capable. Maybe I can grow. Maybe I am enough. But this process must be intentional. We must identify the belief, challenge its logic, and take actions that disprove it. Without this, limiting beliefs remain self-fulfilling prophecies. They become stories we live inside, unaware that the door has always been unlocked. The mind is incredibly adaptive, but it follows instruction. If we continue to feed it the same beliefs, it will continue to produce the same results. To change our lives, we must first change the script from which our mind reads. Empowering beliefs, building a foundation for transformation. Just as limiting beliefs confine, empowering beliefs expand. These are the mental frameworks that affirm our potential, reinforce resilience, and cultivate a sense of inner agency. Beliefs such as, I am capable of growth, I deserve love, challenges are opportunities, and I can learn anything I commit to serve as rocket fuel for personal evolution. Unlike shallow positivity, empowering beliefs are not delusions of perfection. They are grounded acknowledgments of human capacity and adaptability. They do not deny difficulty, but reframe it. They see failure not as final, but as feedback, struggle not as punishment, but as a path. Such beliefs are not automatically programmed. They must be consciously cultivated, practiced, and lived. To build an empowering belief system is to become the gardener of one's own mind, pulling weeds of doubt and planting seeds of truth, nurturing them daily through action, reflection, and repetition. The formation of empowering beliefs begins with intention. We must ask ourselves, what do I want to believe about myself, life, and others? The answers to this question serve as the blueprint for mental redesign. But intention alone is not enough. Beliefs are formed through emotion, repetition, and experience. Therefore, we must feel our new beliefs in the body, reinforce them through regular mental rehearsal, and act in ways that align with them. For instance, if I want to believe I am worthy of love, I must treat myself with love through boundaries, self-care, and honest expression. I must challenge thoughts of unworthiness when they arise, not by fighting them, but by offering a more compassionate narrative. Over time, the brain rewires. Neuroplasticity ensures that repeated thoughts and actions carve new neural pathways, eventually becoming the new default. This is not instantaneous, but it is inevitable with consistency. The mind, though shaped by the past, is not imprisoned by it. We can train it, reshape it, and lead it toward truth. This is what makes mental mastery a practice rather than a destination. It is the daily discipline of choosing our beliefs rather than inheriting them unconsciously. One of the most profound shifts occurs when we stop trying to prove our worth and begin to live from it. Empowering beliefs are not about superiority or ego. They are about alignment. When we believe we are valuable, we stop settling for crumbs. When we believe we are capable, we stop avoiding challenge. When we believe we are connected to something greater, we stop living in fear. These beliefs change not only our inner world, but our outer reality. Opportunities appear where we once saw dead ends. Relationships deepen where we once held back. Possibilities emerge where we once believed we were stuck. This is not magic. It is alignment. Life responds to the energy we bring, and that energy is shaped by what we believe. The more we invest in empowering beliefs, the more empowered our actions become. And from empowered actions come empowered outcomes. The mind, once our master, becomes our servant, a faithful instrument of our conscious evolution. Chapter 7. Emotional Intelligence, the Bridge Between Thought and Life. The language of emotion, recognizing the inner signals. Emotions are not disruptions to the thinking mind, but its vital collaborators, messengers that speak in a different language yet hold insights that thought alone cannot access. From the flicker of irritation to the flood of grief, our emotional states serve as internal signposts, pointing to unmet needs, unresolved conflicts, or unspoken truths. Yet many people spend a lifetime trying to suppress, ignore, or intellectualize their emotions, mistaking them for weakness or chaos rather than wisdom. This disconnect is often learned early when children are told not to cry, not to be angry, not to feel too much or too deeply. Emotions become shameful instead of sacred, and we learn to armor ourselves against their tidal currents. But in doing so, we lose access to a critical dimension of awareness. The mind may analyze, but it is the heart that knows. Emotion, when properly understood, is not irrational, it is relational. It reflects the dynamic interplay between our internal world and external reality. A feeling of anxiety may point to a misalignment between what we value and how we are living. A flash of anger might reveal a boundary that has been crossed. A surge of joy may confirm that we are in alignment with our purpose. When we learn to recognize and decode these inner signals, we begin to operate with a fuller spectrum of intelligence. Recognizing emotion, however, is not the same as being consumed by it. Emotional intelligence does not mean drowning in feeling or reacting impulsively. It means learning to observe, understand, and respond to emotions with clarity and compassion. This requires presence. The emotionally intelligent individual is not swept away by every internal tide, but stands anchored in awareness, able to witness a feeling without being overtaken by it. They do not suppress sadness or pretend to be calm when they are seething. Instead, they acknowledge the truth of the feeling, explore its source, and make conscious choices about how to express it. This practice creates a bridge between the emotional and rational minds, integrating heart and head into a coherent whole. It cultivates a state of internal coherence, where thought and feeling align rather than conflict. When this integration occurs, decision-making becomes sharper, relationships deepen, and stress decreases. Life becomes less reactive and more responsive. But this transformation begins with one simple, courageous act: naming what we feel. Neuroscience confirms that the act of labeling an emotion reduces its intensity in the brain's threat centers and reactivates the prefrontal cortex, the seat of reason and planning. To say, "I feel overwhelmed," is not weakness. It is the first step toward clarity and empowerment. Developing this capacity means rebuilding a relationship with our emotional self, often after years or decades of neglect. It means tuning in, listening deeply, and resisting the urge to judge or fix too quickly. Instead of asking, "How do I get rid of this feeling?" we learn to ask, "What is this feeling trying to tell me?" The answer might not come immediately, but the question itself is a doorway to self-awareness. And with each moment of emotional honesty, we gain access to deeper truths, not just about our current state, but about our history, our values, and our needs. Emotion, in this sense, becomes a teacher. It reveals what logic cannot, the tender undercurrents of the human experience. And when we learn to read its language fluently, we gain not only insight, but freedom. We are no longer ruled by unconscious impulses or trapped in numbness. We become whole again, feeling and thinking in concert, living with the full depth of our humanity. Self-regulation, transforming reaction into response. The second pillar of emotional intelligence, self-regulation, is not the denial of emotion, but the mastery of it. It is the capacity to hold the charge of a powerful feeling without acting on it blindly. It is what separates impulsive reaction from intentional response, chaos from calm, and regret from wisdom. But regulation does not mean suppression. To regulate is to acknowledge and engage with our emotions in a way that is neither reactive nor avoidant. It means recognizing a wave of anger, fear, or sadness, and choosing how to move through it in a way that is aligned with our values and goals. This level of mastery cannot be achieved through willpower alone. It requires emotional literacy, somatic awareness, and an ongoing practice of mindfulness. The body is a key ally in this process, for emotion is experienced physically before it is understood cognitively. Tension in the jaw, tightness in the chest, a racing heart. These are signals from the nervous system that alert us to emotional activation. When we become attuned to these signals, we can intervene early, soothing the system before it reaches the point of rupture. Self-regulation is a muscle, strengthened through repetition. Each time we pause instead of reacting, breathe instead of yelling, or reflect instead of spiraling, we create a new neural pathway, a new default pattern. The brain, shaped by repetition, begins to favor response over reactivity. This does not mean we become emotionless or stoic. On the contrary, it allows us to feel more deeply without being controlled by the feeling. We learn to create space between stimulus and response, and in that space lies our power. This is the realm where conscious choice replaces unconscious programming. Consider the power of a single breath. In the heat of conflict, one intentional inhale can shift the trajectory of a conversation. In the grip of anxiety, grounding the body can prevent a cascade of panic. Regulation is not dramatic. It is subtle, internal, and immensely powerful. It is not something we do to our emotions, but with them. We become partners with our nervous system, allies of our inner world. And as we cultivate this inner calm, we begin to influence our external world as well. This skill becomes particularly transformative in relationships. Emotional intelligence is not measured by how we feel alone, but by how we show up with others. In moments of tension, misunderstanding, or conflict, the emotionally intelligent person can stay present with their own feelings without attacking or withdrawing. They can listen without defensiveness, speak with honesty rather than blame, and repair ruptures without losing dignity. This is not innate, it is learned. It is the result of emotional discipline practiced over time, and it begins within. Before we can show up calmly for others, we must learn to hold space for ourselves. Self-regulation is an act of self-respect. It communicates to the inner child, the wounded self, and the nervous system. You are safe. You are heard. You are in good hands. This internal security becomes the foundation for external confidence. It allows us to take risks, navigate complexity, and recover from setbacks with grace. And it turns emotion from an obstacle into an asset, an energy that can be directed with purpose and poise. Empathy and social insight, connecting through emotional attunement. Empathy is often romanticized as simply feeling with another person, but in practice, it is a nuanced skill that requires deep presence, emotional attunement, and an ability to see beyond the surface. It is not about fixing someone's pain or absorbing their suffering. It is about meeting them in it, bearing witness to their experience without judgment or agenda. Empathy is the bridge that connects individual minds into shared experience. It is what allows us to sense the unsaid, to read between the lines of language, and to respond in ways that resonate at a human level. But empathy is not just emotional. It is cognitive and behavioral. It involves understanding someone's perspective, feeling their emotion, and responding in a way that honors their reality. This requires not only openness, but humility. It means setting aside our own narratives long enough to truly hear someone else's. And in a world saturated with noise, distraction, and self-focus, this quality has become both rare and revolutionary. At its core, empathy is born from self-awareness. We can only meet others to the depth that we have met ourselves. If we cannot hold our own sadness, we will flinch at another's tears. If we fear our own anger, we will recoil from another's rage. Thus, emotional intelligence is a prerequisite for authentic connection. It allows us to stay grounded in our own experience while reaching into another's. This dual awareness of self and other creates the conditions for trust, intimacy, and collaboration. In professional settings, empathy becomes the glue that binds effective teams. Leaders who practice emotional attunement inspire loyalty, foster psychological safety, and motivate through connection rather than control. In personal relationships, empathy is the thread that weaves resilience into love. It allows for repair after conflict, deepens understanding during struggle, and creates the sense of being seen and known. It is not always comfortable. True empathy asks us to stretch beyond our comfort zones, to feel what is painful or foreign, but it is profoundly humanizing. Developing empathy is not about passivity or indulgence. It is about strength and skill. It begins with presence, the choice to be fully here, not distracted or defensive. It continues with curiosity, the willingness to ask, listen, and explore another's truth without inserting our own. And it culminates in resonance, the ability to respond in a way that communicates, I see you. I get it. You matter. This does not mean agreeing with everything or absorbing every emotion. Healthy empathy includes boundaries. It knows the difference between support and enmeshment. It can say, I care about your pain, but I am not responsible for it. This balance preserves both connection and integrity. And as empathy becomes a way of being, it transforms not only relationships, but culture. Families become more open. Workplaces become more humane. Communities become more compassionate. Empathy in this way is not a soft skill. It is a survival skill. It allows us to navigate a complex, interconnected world with grace, to build bridges where there are walls, and to lead with heart as well as mind. Chapter 8. The Unconscious Mind, Rewiring the Invisible Blueprint Beneath the Surface, Mapping the Landscape of the Unconscious. The conscious mind is a spotlight, focused, deliberate, and limited in scope. It is the part of us that thinks in language, makes decisions, and believes it is in control. But beneath its narrow beam lies the vast, shadowed territory of the unconscious, a realm so expansive and influential that it governs up to 95% of our behavior without our awareness. This subterranean world does not communicate in logic, but in symbols, sensations, dreams, and impulses. It stores not only memories but beliefs, learned responses, suppressed emotions, and deeply rooted patterns formed long before we were old enough to evaluate them. We live much of our lives reacting to scripts we didn't write, fulfilling expectations we didn't choose, and repeating emotional cycles we don't understand. The unconscious mind is not malicious. It is protective. Its job is to automate, conserve energy, and shield us from perceived danger. But left unexamined, it can become a silent puppeteer, pulling strings from the depths while we wonder why we keep reliving the same stories. Understanding the unconscious requires humility because it means acknowledging that we are not always the rational, sovereign beings we imagine ourselves to be. It also requires courage because the unconscious often hides what we have deemed too painful, shameful, or confusing to confront. childhood wounds, internalized criticism, trauma responses. All of these are buried in the layers beneath our awareness, influencing our choices, relationships, and perceptions. We may find ourselves sabotaging success, avoiding intimacy, or staying stuck in patterns, not because we lack willpower, but because a hidden part of us associates change with danger. The child who was ridiculed for speaking out may grow into an adult who unconsciously shrinks in meetings. The teenager who learned that love comes with abandonment may attract partners who validate that wound. The person who felt unsafe in joy may find themselves inexplicably anxious when life feels good. These are not random neuroses. They are encrypted codes, formed in the past and repeated in the present, until brought into the light of awareness. To map this internal terrain, we must learn to observe our lives not just through what happens, but through how we respond. Our triggers are gateways. Our resistances are signposts. Our repetitive struggles are clues. When we start to ask, not just what am I doing, but what is this pattern trying to protect or preserve, we begin to decipher the language of the unconscious. Tools such as journaling, meditation, inner child work, dream analysis, and somatic therapy become bridges into this hidden realm. They help us become archaeologists of the self, excavating the layers that lie beneath our conscious stories. And as we explore, we discover that the unconscious is not just a vault of limitation. It is also a reservoir of creativity, intuition, and transformation. By befriending this part of the mind, we gain access to a source of power more potent than discipline alone, the power of alignment. For when the unconscious and conscious minds move in harmony, change becomes not only possible, but inevitable. Core beliefs, the silent architects of reality. At the heart of the unconscious lie our core beliefs, deep-seated convictions about ourselves, others, and the world that operate as internal operating systems. These beliefs are not necessarily true, but they feel like truth. They are formed through repetition, emotional imprinting, and authority figures in our early life. A child who grows up hearing, "You're too sensitive," may internalize the belief, "My emotions are a problem." One who is constantly compared to siblings may form, "I'm not enough." A person raised in a chaotic environment may adopt, "The world is unsafe," as a core assumption. These beliefs do not stay dormant. They shape perception, filter experience, and create a self-fulfilling prophecy. We do not see the world as it is. We see it as we are, through the lens of what we have learned to believe. The mind seeks coherence, not truth, so it will interpret events in ways that validate its beliefs. If I believe I am unworthy, I will overlook praise, fixate on criticism, and unconsciously gravitate toward situations that reinforce my sense of inadequacy. Core beliefs are often hidden behind our rationalizations and identities. They disguise themselves as personality traits or preferences. We may say, "I'm just not good at relationships," when beneath that lies a belief like, "I don't deserve love," or "I'm a perfectionist," which masks, "I am only safe when I am flawless." These beliefs are not inherently malicious. They were formed to help us survive emotionally overwhelming situations. They served a purpose at the time of formation. But carried into adulthood, they become maladaptive. They restrict growth, limit choices, and reinforce suffering. The tragedy is not that we have these beliefs. It is that we often accept them as immutable facts. True freedom begins when we question the thoughts we've never thought to question. When we identify a core belief, we create an opportunity not just to think differently, but to live differently. The process involves both awareness and reprogramming. First, we name the belief. Then we trace its origin, challenge its validity, and begin to install new beliefs that reflect who we are becoming, not who we were forced to be. Rewiring core beliefs is not a matter of affirmations alone. It requires emotional congruence and repetition. The unconscious does not respond to surface declarations. It responds to felt truth. Saying, "I am enough," means little if every fiber of your nervous system flinches at the idea. So we work slowly, introducing new beliefs not as slogans, but as possibilities. What if I am enough? What if love can be safe? These questions bypass resistance and invite curiosity. As we collect new experiences, relationships that nurture, choices that empower, challenges that reveal strength, the new belief gains evidence and the old one loses its grip. Neuroplasticity supports this process. The brain can form new pathways when given consistent, emotionally charged input. And over time, what was once a foreign idea becomes a felt reality. We begin to show up differently, not because we are forcing change, but because we have changed the very foundation of how we see ourselves and the world. Core beliefs are not destiny. They are scripts, and every day we hold the pen. The power of reprogramming. Techniques for lasting change. Transforming the unconscious is not a mystical process. It is a psychological and neurological one. Just as patterns are installed through repetition and emotion, they can be rewritten through the same mechanisms. The first step is always awareness. We cannot change what we cannot see. By identifying our recurring thoughts, emotional triggers, and behavioral loops, we bring unconscious patterns into conscious awareness. But awareness alone is not enough. We must then reprogram deliberately and consistently, inputting new mental and emotional data into the system. One of the most effective tools in this process is visualization. The brain, remarkably, does not distinguish strongly between real and vividly imagined experiences. When we visualize ourselves acting, feeling, and responding in new ways, calm in conflict, confident in risk, open in love, we are rehearsing new neural pathways. When done regularly, these mental rehearsals become blueprints for actual behavior. Athletes, performers, and high achievers have used this technique for decades, but it is equally potent in emotional transformation. Visualizing oneself as healed, secure, and empowered is not fantasy. It is training. Another powerful method is self-directed neuroplasticity through language. The words we repeat shape the networks our brain favors. Replacing old automatic thoughts with intentional, empowering language requires diligence, but it is the foundation of cognitive reprogramming. Techniques like thought reframing, affirmations, when embodied, and belief journaling allow us to gradually shift the dominant voice in our minds. Paired with somatic practices like breathwork, body scanning, and nervous system regulation, we begin to install not just intellectual change, but embodied change. The unconscious mind is heavily influenced by state. When we are in a calm, regulated state, we are more suggestible to new beliefs. Therefore, combining affirming thoughts with relaxation or elevated emotion increases their potency. Meditation, hypnosis, and emotional freedom techniques, EFT, all leverage this principle. They quiet the critical mind, access deeper layers of consciousness, and allow for more direct communication with the subconscious. With repetition, consistency, and emotional engagement, new beliefs become normalized. Yet perhaps the most transformative tool of all is inner dialogue. We are in constant conversation with ourselves, often without noticing it. The tone, content, and quality of that dialogue determine the climate of our inner world. When we catch ourselves in old scripts, self-judgment, fear, inadequacy, we can pause and intervene. We can speak to the younger parts of us with compassion. We can offer reassurance, perspective, and new interpretations. This practice is not make-believe. It is neurobiological repair. It creates secure internal attachment, allowing parts of us frozen in childhood to reintegrate and mature. As we nurture ourselves in this way, we change not only how we feel, but who we believe ourselves to be. The unconscious, then, is no longer a battleground. It becomes a garden. With care, attention, and deliberate planning, we grow new patterns of thought, feeling, and behavior. And over time, what once felt like fate reveals itself as habit. We reclaim authorship over our internal world. We become not just thinkers, but recreators of our minds, our lives, and our possibilities. Chapter 9. Emotional Alchemy. Transforming feeling into freedom. The language of emotion. From reaction to revelation. Human emotion is the most intimate language of the inner world, a deeply coded system of energetic signals designed to guide, alert, and inform us. Yet, in the modern world, emotions are often misunderstood, suppressed, or pathologized. We are taught to fear sadness, avoid anger, suppress fear, and even to mistrust joy, as if feelings themselves are threats rather than messages. This distorted relationship with emotion arises from a cultural inheritance that has long elevated reason above feeling, viewing logic as control and emotion as weakness. But emotion at its core is not irrational. It is primal intelligence, a felt sense of our alignment with truth. Each emotion arises for a reason, shaped by our nervous system's perception of safety, belonging, meaning, and authenticity. Fear is not a flaw, but a signal of perceived threat. Anger is not an enemy, but a boundary cry. Sadness is not indulgence, but evidence of value. And joy, too often fleeting, is a permission slip into wholeness. When we begin to understand emotion not as something to overcome, but something to understand, we awaken to the rich internal landscape that feelings provide. They are not obstacles to thought. They are precursors to insight. To transform our experience of emotion, we must first develop emotional literacy, the capacity to name, validate, and feel what arises without judgment. This means abandoning the dichotomy of positive and negative feelings, which falsely labels discomfort as wrong. Painful emotions are not toxic. Suppression is. When we push feelings down, they do not disappear. They go underground, taking root in the body, resurfacing in symptoms, projections, and patterns that confuse us. Repressed sadness becomes numbness. Unacknowledged anger becomes passive aggression. Ignored fear becomes control. The body remembers what the mind forgets, and emotion, when denied expression, becomes a ghost that haunts behavior. Learning to sit with emotion, without distraction, story, or resistance, is a sacred act. In this stillness, we move from reaction to revelation. We discover what lies beneath the surface, the unmet need, the ancient wound, the longing for safety or connection. Feeling becomes a form of knowing. We no longer fear our inner experience, but learn from it, and in doing so, we reclaim power over the parts of ourselves we once rejected. This process requires the cultivation of internal safety. Many people struggle to feel because, at some point, feeling became dangerous. Trauma, neglect, or emotional invalidation taught them that to express emotion was to risk rejection, punishment, or overwhelm. So they adapted, not by healing the feeling, but by disconnecting from it. The nervous system, brilliant in its design, created protective strategies to limit sensation, trading connection for survival. As adults, these strategies may no longer serve us, yet they persist unless consciously reworked. Creating a safe container for emotional processing, whether through mindful solitude, therapy, or supportive community, allows these long-held defenses to soften. We learn that it is now safe to feel, to cry, to rage, to grieve, to celebrate. And in this permission, we begin the alchemical process of turning emotion into insight, pain into wisdom, and vulnerability into strength. Emotional transmutation, alchemy of the psyche. True emotional transformation, what ancient mystics called alchemy, begins when we learn not to bypass our emotions, but to move through them with presence and intentionality. Emotional alchemy is the process by which we transmute the raw energy of feeling into a higher frequency of understanding. It is not denial or repression, nor is it indulgence or chaos. It is conscious navigation, a skill that emerges through practice, patience, and deep inner listening. Just as heat transforms matter, presence transforms emotion. When we give full attention to what arises without trying to change it, we create the energetic space for the emotion to evolve. This requires slowing down, tuning in, and meeting ourselves with compassion rather than criticism. Instead of saying, "I shouldn't feel this," we say, "What is this here to show me?" The question itself invites expansion. It opens the emotional experience from contraction to curiosity, and in doing so, the emotion often shifts, not because we forced it to, but because it was seen. Each emotion contains within it a message and a medicine. Anger, when honored, reveals boundaries that need reinforcing or values that have been violated. Fear, when listened to, shows where safety must be rebuilt or courage summoned. Grief, when fully felt, reveals the depth of love and the impermanence of all things. Joy, when embraced, becomes an act of resistance against despair and scarcity. Emotional alchemy is not about replacing darkness with light, but integrating both into wholeness. It is the recognition that every feeling has a rightful place in the human experience, and that emotions, like seasons, come to pass, not to punish, but to teach. This perspective transforms us from victims of feeling into stewards of sensation. We no longer fear emotion, but trust it, and in doing so, we unlock resilience, wisdom, and authenticity. There are specific practices that support this transmutation. Breathwork, for example, can shift emotional energy stored in the body, unlocking sensations and memories held in cellular memory. Movement, especially intuitive, unstructured motion, can free trapped feelings and restore flow. Sound, whether through voice, music, or vibration, can resonate with emotion in ways that transcend words, offering catharsis and clarity. Writing becomes a mirror, allowing emotion to be translated into language and understood. Creative expression, through art, dance, poetry, can give form to the formless, allowing what is ineffable to be seen and shared. These are not escapist tools, but transformational ones. They create a bridge between the inner and outer worlds, allowing emotion to move rather than stagnate. In the act of expression, emotion completes its cycle. It informs, transforms, and releases. This is the heart of emotional alchemy. To feel fully, process consciously, and emerge not depleted, but deepened by the journey. Emotional sovereignty, becoming the guardian of your inner world. Emotional sovereignty is the state of owning, understanding, and mastering one's emotional experience without outsourcing responsibility to others or external circumstances. It is the realization that while we cannot always control what triggers us, we can choose how we respond. This is not suppression or dissociation, but a form of empowered emotional regulation. It involves setting internal boundaries, developing awareness of our inner landscape, and cultivating practices that restore equilibrium when disrupted. Emotional sovereignty does not mean we never feel overwhelmed. It means we know how to return to center. It does not require perfection, but presence. And it begins with radical accountability, the willingness to claim every emotional reaction as ours to investigate and tend, even when it was sparked by someone else. This shift from blame to ownership is foundational. It moves us from a reactive posture waiting for others to change, into a proactive stance where we become the guardians of our emotional state. To achieve this level of mastery, we must disentangle from the stories and projections that often accompany emotion. When we are emotionally hijacked, the mind rushes to create narratives. They disrespected me. I'm always abandoned. This always happens to me. These stories often reinforce old wounds and prevent healing. Emotional sovereignty requires that we pause the story and return to the sensation. What am I feeling in my body? Where is this coming from? What do I need right now? This inward focus brings us back to truth. It helps us respond rather than react. And from this place, we can communicate more clearly, set boundaries more effectively, and make choices aligned with our values rather than our pain. This is not easy, especially when emotions are intense. But with practice, emotional regulation becomes not a suppression of feeling, but a mastery of flow. We learn when to express, when to hold, when to reflect, and when to act. We stop being emotional weather systems, blown by every wind, and become the steady observer of our inner skies. Emotional sovereignty also requires emotional hygiene, the daily practices that keep our inner world clear and coherent. Just as we tend to our physical bodies through rest, nutrition, and movement, so too must we tend to our emotions. This may mean starting the day with grounding practices, meditation, intention setting, or breathwork to establish internal safety. It may involve checking in throughout the day, noticing tension or emotional residue, and clearing it through movement, journaling, or stillness. It may mean ending the day with reflection, gratitude, or release. These rituals are not indulgent. They are essential. They create a rhythm of connection to self that prevents emotional backlog and fosters clarity. Over time, we become fluent in our emotional language. We know what sadness feels like before it becomes despair, what anger feels like before it erupts, what joy feels like before we numb it. This fluency empowers us to live not at the mercy of our emotions, but in partnership with them. We become sovereign, not because we control emotion, but because we understand it deeply and navigate it wisely. Chapter 10. The Integrated Self. Living as the master of your inner world integration, weaving thought, emotion, and identity. There comes a point on the journey of inner mastery where accumulation must give way to integration, where knowledge, insight, and practice are not simply stacked like books on a shelf, but absorbed into the very marrow of who we are. Integration is not a moment of arrival, but a lived embodiment. It is the state in which our thoughts, emotions, behaviors, and values are no longer fragmented, but united under a coherent self. The path to integration begins with conscious recognition, to observe not just the individual pieces of ourselves, the thinker, the feeler, the doer, the wounded child, the resilient adult, but to realize how they interact, inform, and shape one another. It is one thing to master thought, another to transmute emotion, and yet another to take sovereign action. But to integrate these capacities into a unified way of being, that is mastery in motion. In integration, the internal becomes congruent. What we think, what we feel, what we say, and what we do are in alignment. We are not at war with our impulses or trapped in cycles of self-betrayal. We no longer need to pretend, perform, or protect fragmented parts of ourselves. We operate from inner truth, guided not by fear or conditioning, but by conscious intention. The process of integration requires both time and trust, time to revisit old wounds and stories with new awareness, and trust that healing does not mean erasing the past, but including it without being ruled by it. We do not become integrated by eliminating pain or exiling parts of ourselves we find inconvenient. Rather, we become whole by turning toward the shadow, the unconscious, the parts we once disowned. Integration means reconciling the internal divides between the mind that wants control and the heart that longs for connection, between the ego that seeks survival and the soul that seeks expansion. It is the art of welcoming contradiction without collapse. For many, this feels counterintuitive. We are conditioned to resolve tension by choosing sides: logic or intuition, productivity or presence, ambition or peace. But integration asks that we hold duality in both hands, that we become the vessel expansive enough to contain apparent opposites. In this holding, a new center emerges, not one built on compromise, but on wholeness. We begin to experience life not as a sequence of roles we inhabit, but as a fluid expression of our integrated self. There is relief in this coherence. We stop seeking approval from the external world because our inner alignment becomes our compass. Living in this state does not mean we no longer experience fear, grief, anger, or doubt. Rather, integration ensures that when these emotions arise, they are met with presence and clarity, not panic or projection. Integrated individuals still falter, but they return more quickly to center. They do not abandon themselves in discomfort, nor do they over-identify with their suffering. They know how to hold space for emotion without drowning in it, how to pause between stimulus and response, how to make meaning from difficulty. They have developed inner musculature, not rigid armor, but resilient responsiveness. The integrated self is not a perfected persona, but a fully human being, aware, awake, and accountable. This level of self-awareness allows us to navigate the world with integrity. Our relationships deepen because we no longer seek completion in others. Our work becomes meaningful because it expresses our values. Our days become sacred, not because of external validation, but because our inner world is ordered, whole, and at peace. This is the fruit of mastery, not control over life's outcomes, but coherence in how we meet life itself. Conscious creation, living intentionally from the inside out. Once we have integrated the many layers of our inner world, we begin to live not reactively, but creatively. Conscious creation is the art of shaping our external life as a mirror of our internal alignment. It is the recognition that we are not merely products of circumstance, but participants in the unfolding of reality. While we cannot control all variables, we can determine the meaning we make, the direction we choose, and the energy we bring to each moment. Conscious creators are not wishful thinkers, but active architects. They begin with clarity about who they are, what they value, and how they want to show up in the world. From this clarity emerges discernment. Not every opportunity is a match. Not every emotion requires action. Not every thought deserves a throne. Conscious living is curated living, not in the superficial sense of aesthetic perfection, but in the deeper sense of aligned attention. We begin to guard our time, our energy, and our focus as sacred resources. We no longer outsource our purpose to circumstance or wait for permission to begin. We understand that our life is the canvas and our consciousness the brush. Intentional living also demands that we stay attuned to feedback, not just from others, but from life itself. Every moment offers a reflection of our inner frequency. If we experience chronic disconnection, perhaps we are avoiding truth. If we face repeated obstacles, perhaps we are clinging to outdated beliefs. The conscious creator does not spiral into blame but leans into inquiry. What is life showing me? What am I being invited to release or embody? This orientation transforms challenges into invitations and discomfort into growth. It is not about toxic positivity or bypassing difficulty. It is about recognizing that even in hardship, we retain agency over how we frame, feel, and flow. The difference between reaction and creation is pause. In that sacred pause, we get to choose, not from impulse, but from clarity. This is how momentum shifts, One conscious choice becomes a habit. One aligned decision alters a trajectory. The future is not some distant destination. It is shaped right now by our orientation, perception, and participation. Moreover, conscious creation is not merely about individual gain. It is deeply relational. When we live from alignment, we contribute more authentically to the collective. We stop perpetuating patterns of scarcity, fear, and division. Our choices ripple outward, not just in what we build, but in how we relate. The integrated self is not isolated but interconnected. It understands that personal mastery contributes to collective healing. Our thoughts shape not only our lives, but the emotional tone of our homes, communities, and cultures. When we think with integrity, feel with honesty, and act with intention, we become catalysts for transformation. We no longer wait for the world to change. We become the change, seeded from within and shared through conscious action. In this way, our lives become not just meaningful, but medicinal. Every aligned life is a living transmission, a beacon reminding others what is possible when the mind is mastered, the heart is open, and the self is whole. The mastery mindset, sustaining inner freedom. The final stage of inner mastery is not achievement. It is sustainability. Many can awaken, but few remain awake. The world is noisy, demanding, and often seductive in its invitations to forget who we are. That is why true mastery is a mindset, a way of relating to life that is rooted in awareness, adaptability, and alignment. The mastery mindset does not seek perfection, but presence. It knows that every day offers an opportunity to return, to refine, to recommit. It is not obsessed with outcomes, but with process. It understands that freedom is not found in what we escape, but in how we engage. This mindset is marked by curiosity rather than judgment, discipline rather than rigidity, compassion rather than complacency. It welcomes feedback as fuel, not failure. It does not collapse in the face of challenge, but rises in inquiry. The mastery mindset is not loud. It is steady. It does not need to prove, perform, or posture. It is rooted in a quiet confidence, born of deep self-knowing. This mindset turns everyday life into a dojo, a training ground where every interaction, every trigger, every setback becomes an opportunity to practice presence and embody truth. To sustain this mindset, we must build practices that nourish it. Just as we brush our teeth or care for our bodies, we must tend to our inner landscape. Morning stillness, daily reflection, intentional movement, conscious consumption. These are not luxuries, but necessities. They tether us to self. Without them, we drift. With them, we anchor. Equally important is community, not one of performance or pretense, but of mutual accountability and depth. We need spaces where our growth is witnessed and mirrored, where we can be both challenged and held. The mastery mindset does not thrive in isolation. It deepens in connection. It requires mirrors, mentors, and moments of humility. And perhaps most of all, it requires a long view. Mastery is not linear. There will be seasons of doubt, of regression, of forgetting. But with a mastery mindset, even forgetting becomes part of the path. We learn to fall with grace and rise with wisdom. We stop measuring progress by perfection and start measuring it by our willingness to return. Again and again we choose presence. Again and again we choose alignment. In this choosing, we become free. Not because life becomes easy, but because we are no longer ruled by what is outside of us. Ultimately, the mastery mindset is not about becoming someone new. It is about remembering who we have always been beneath the noise of conditioning. It is about coming home to the self that is whole, wise, and free. This is not an intellectual idea. It is an embodied experience. It is the peace that comes from no longer being at war with yourself. It is the joy that comes from living in integrity. It is the power that comes from owning your story and shaping your future. And it is the love that arises when you stop seeking it outside and start generating it within. When you live with this mindset, life changes. Not because circumstances shift, but because your orientation to them does. You walk differently. You speak differently. You create differently. You lead differently. Not from ego, but from essence. This is the promise of the path you've walked, the path of mastering your thoughts, your emotions, your actions, your life. You do not arrive at some final destination. You arrive at yourself, fully, finally, and forever home.